Hi, good morning, everyone. This is your instructor, Kuldeep, in the class. Before we proceed with the session, just a quick check that everybody can hear me loud and clear. Can have your answers on the chat. Great. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks a lot. And thank you for joining us today. I welcome you to this AZ-900 series session, which is talking about Microsoft Azure Cloud Fundamentals. So during this, we would be discussing four major modules, which would be talking about pretty much on the Azure cloud and how being a beginner, we should start our cloud journey when it comes to Microsoft Azure product line. So let me quickly have my screen shared over here real quick. There we are. So thank you very much, guys, once again. And I welcome you to this AZ-900, which is my Microsoft Azure fundamentals. And this is pretty much what we would be covering as part of today's planned schedule. Let's quickly introduce myself. Being 18 plus years into the industry, I started working with a couple of Microsoft Dynamics product line, pretty much the ERP segment of that, slowly and gradually moving to the CRM space of that, and then moving to the infrastructure side of the same thing, working up on the private cloud, the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud competencies, and pretty much on Azure. Being your instructor, I'm already certified as a solution architect. I'm done my developer exam as well, and I've done all three data tracks as part of my Azure certifications. And since you're joining this session at your pace, from your home, at your comfort, so we would be discussing everything, what it requires to be a beginner and slowly and gradually moving yourself to the cloud journey right across in there. Now, having said at the same time, let's proceed and then discuss about what we would be discussing as part of this particular program. So this one-day program is pretty much provide the foundational level knowledge when I talk about the foundations, that what an Azure foundation level person should be aware about. So you would be discussing plenty of cloud concepts. And when I say so, the cloud concept, you would be discussing the core Azure services. We would be discussing the security and privacy along with the compliance settings at the same point of time. Having said that, whenever we talk about this one, it is important to understand who should ideally be participating in this Azure Cloud program. So the audience for the course is just the beginners to learn about the cloud computing concept and how Microsoft Azure provides those particular options to upgrade yourself into your cloud journey. So you could be an absolute beginner, you could be an intermediate. It's pretty much you're willing to learn about Azure and the major functionalities it does provide being a public cloud provider. We would be discussing plenty of those things down there. There are two versions of this particular program. So to talk about this particular course, there are actually two different versions of the same thing. One, which is a one-day program, and second, which is a two-day program. In terms of deliverables, both are exactly the same. We are doing this in a single day program. You can have it the same thing in a 2 days program as well. The only difference it would make is in case of a 2 days program, participants are having their hands-on labs as well. So at the end of the session today, you guys would be receiving your free Azure passes, which you can always activate to get you some sort of hands-on exposures, and you can pretty much activate them without exposing any of your credit card details or banking details informations. They are absolutely free promotional subscriptions, which you guys would be receiving at the end of the day. The content for both courses aligns to primarily the AZ-900 objectives. So whenever we talk about what we are covering in the program, all these courses, whether it's a one-day program or 2 days program, they are pretty much helping you prepare your entry-level AZ-900 fundamentals exam. We would be discussing that. Although there are absolutely no prerequisites to attend this particular program, it's highly recommended if you know a little bit about computing platforms, might be on-prem environment of that, might be some of the platform as a service concept. You might be a little bit awareness you might be having in a different cloud strategy with a different cloud provider. But overall, there are absolutely no requirements to attend this particular program. And we would be discussing all those things in much more detail. Having said that, there are four major modules what we would be covering as part of today's planned schedule. One of them is going to be my Azure cloud concepts. And this is the only module which would be having less hands-on, a little bit more on the theoretical part of it, giving you a 10,000 level feet of overview of different Azure services, what Microsoft Azure provides you out of that. Starting from module number 2, we would be working on Azure core services in terms of what Azure services are, how can you start creating them, start utilizing them. Some of the walkthroughs we would be discussing on various cloud services. How do we go with the portal analysis, doing it from the instance itself, portal, doing it from CLI, doing it from PowerShell, a couple of things we will be doing as part of that. We would also be working up on Azure security, privacy, compliance, and trust, which would talk about how much security being a public cloud provider can Azure provide you as part of the security framework, which is coming up on top of the platform. And we would be also be discussing the Azure pricing and the support options which are available with Microsoft Azure Cloud. So these are the four modules down there, and pretty much the same modules, the same level of skills you would be requiring to appear for your entry-level AZ-900 exam. So as far as some of the breaks are concerned in here, we would be having two small breaks, 15 minutes roughly down there, and a lunch break provided at noon down there. And feel free any point of time if you feel a little bit of overexposed to the knowledge or pretty much things going up out of the way down there, feel free to let me know and we can easily arrange some more breaks as and when required. So that was one thing what we have apart from what you would be covering as part of your certification profiles. So the four major modules we were discussing, what are my cloud concepts, the Azure services, the security, privacy, and compliance and trust, along with the pricing and support. This is the weightage of what kind of exam questions will appear, how much every concept is contributing, helping you prepare for your AZ-900 certification. So this course directly maps to this AZ-900 exam, and the percentage in pretty much indicates the relative weight of the type of questions will come up from which particular areas down there. At the same point of time, the higher the percentage, the more questions you will see in that particular area. So more importantly, you would see lots of questions coming up when it comes to Azure core services, because that's almost contributing 30 to 35% of questions will come up from this area alone. So we would be discussing all of these things in much more details down there. At the same point of time, we are talking about the labs in here, how you guys would be practicing your own cloud fundamentals down there, how I can help you contributing to your practices, how we can help you providing your Azure passes, the promotional subscriptions. But before we do that, it would be absolutely great and my honor to know a little bit about yourself in terms of what are you guys working on, your current technology exposures, and some of your expectations from this particular class. So having said that, I would be launching the polls now. The polls is consisting of four major questions. Feel free to answer them whatever fits best in your case. So I would have some of the ideas in terms of how I should be deriving the class and deriving that particular session. So let me launch the polls. You should be seeing those polls in front of you now. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you answering all those questions during the poll. So looks like majority of the audience belongs to the programming section, being the developers, and a kind of a mixed audience, but majority of the people are technical folks in here. Uh, People working up in the big data space as well. That's great. Good to know that we've got Dynamics 365 people coming in, both functionals and technicals. And that's pretty much about the cloud interface, considering yourself the beginners. Absolutely great. Okay, let's come back where I left, where we were talking about some of the options related to the labs. So it is really important whenever you're working on any of Microsoft program that you get your hands on labs, you get your hands on practices associated, because being a webinar doesn't mean you're going to be sitting and just listening about it. We would be doing plenty of hands-on exercises over here, and we would be providing you the Azure passes so you can have your hands on at yourself as well. So Microsoft's taking care of that in two different particular ways. One, Microsoft's providing you a Microsoft Learn sandbox. What does it mean? It's a free service from Microsoft, which is giving you the hands-on labs in association with Learn on Demands being the backend for the labs provider. That will give you the labs which are required for AZ-900. I would say 40 to 45% of the labs, you can easily do it from here. All you require from there is just an active Microsoft account. I'll provide that information to everybody in the very first break where you can get it. Just have your Microsoft account and start doing labs thereafter whenever you need to do them. But the important thing is some of the labs are optional there because that would be requiring the Microsoft Learning Azure Pass. So that's why we, being your preferred technology partners, or pretty much this event sponsor, we would be providing you the Azure Learning Passes over there. What it is actually, it is a promotional subscription, first of all, which is provided by Microsoft to Azure students or participants down there. That will give you $100 limit, which would be valid for 30 days, whichever comes first. So if you're spending $100, that's gone. And if 30 days are expired and the credit limit stays there, that is also gone in both the cases. So whichever comes first. And someone from the team will send you the information of your Azure Pass, which would be a free 30 days, $100 credit, which you can utilize for doing plenty of labs, plenty of hands-on exercises, whether they are from this AZ-900 or you would like to do some sort of point of concepts or proof of concepts or any other Azure demonstration, whatever you might want to do by yourself. So that's going to be your Microsoft Learning Azure Pass. Now, it is really important to understand once you get that promotional subscription voucher, how you're going to activate that. And there is a very straightforward and highly recommended process of doing the same thing. So let me explain you how does that work and how do you pretty much activate and redeem that promotional code and pretty much the password you'll be receiving. So let me take you to my browser here real quick. And if you're seeing on the screen on the Zoom meeting, I'm on a website called microsoftazurepass.com. So let's pretty much discuss what the website actually does. This website will help you activating any of your Microsoft promotional subscription, whether you're getting it as a Azure Student Pass or whether it's your Microsoft Partner Competency Azure credits you're applying in there. So all I'm doing over here is I'm clicking on Start. The very first recommended approach, can I use my existing account, existing Microsoft account? Absolutely yes. Can I use my work account, any Office 365 account? I can do that. But should I be doing it? Well, the recommendation is no. And there are reasons behind that. One, your work account might be bounded with some of your Azure policies, some of your Azure Active Directory group restrictions. You might not be able to do plenty of things. Maybe some VPN restrictions might be in there. Your corporate intranet might be disallowing you to do some sort of stuff down there. So you can always, and you should be using your Microsoft account, but you have to be 100% sure that you haven't used any promotional subscription with that account any times in the past. And this is really important. You have to be 100% sure that you have not used any promotional subscription before, else you cannot activate two Azure passes on the same email address. So it's always recommended that you create a new one. It's just few steps down there. You create a new Microsoft account, and that will guarantee that we are using it for the very first time with the Azure subscription. So let me quickly have it over here. I would like to get a new email address. Whatever I would like to make it, let me call it AZ-900, and that's going to be my July 2020. Just making it so it'll come up as unique in there. Let me go next. I'm pretty much creating a new account over here. Let me just go and have that password listed down there. An important thing, it is going to ask some verifications, any kind of pretty much any kind of authentication or anything. Feel free to do that. Let me just have it over here. First thing first, we are not doing anything related to Azure whatsoever. I'm just doing a Azure Pass activation process, and for that I'm creating a new Microsoft account. Let me just do that. So the very first thing, I've just created this email address, and it is highly recommended that you create a new email address while you guys would be activating your Azure Pass today, tomorrow, or whenever that will be appearing. Uh, so that we are 100% sure we are not utilizing that code for any of our existing subscription or any of our existing account, that else the key will get failed down there. That's fine. Let me confirm this Microsoft account. And this is the screen where you would be entering up your Azure Pass. So someone from the team will send you these Azure Pass vouchers to you at the end of today, and that will help you claiming those promo codes, right? Associating that. So it is validating that. And now it will start redeeming that particular promotional subscription. So it is very important that you're doing it with a newly created email, or make sure your existing personal account have not been used on any kind of promotional subscriptions before. So that will take some time. Important thing to notice, we also have some things to focus in terms of you need to click on I agree, and then click on the confirmation checkbox, and that will activate your Azure Pass subscription. In the meanwhile, you can see that over here, it is saying it's signing up for an Azure offer, which is AZR0243P. That's for the Azure Pass sponsorship. This is the subscription you'll be seeing right across in there. Let me just have the locations and all those details filled up in my case down there. And let me have it. All right, I'm clicking next. And then all you need to do is click on that agreement checkbox. This is very simple while you're activating your Azure subscription by providing your credit card details. The only difference is in this case, you don't need to provide any method of payments because this is a sponsorship or pretty much a promotional subscription from Microsoft. So once it will get confirmed, at this point of time, you will see that it is saying setting up your account. But just in case, if you want to go to your Azure portal, I can always do that. The only difference is I'm not going to see any subscription whatsoever. So we will come back over here, maybe later or anything. Important thing is I'm seeing these trials options, no real subscription at this point of time because I'm signing up with my Azure Pass. Once the process gets completed, it will automatically take us to the Azure portal and we can pretty much start working right from there. In the meanwhile, it's working. Let me take you back to my PowerPoint presentation. So this was this particular slide, which was talking about the labs, which are really important when you're preparing yourself for Microsoft Azure Cloud. It could be a Learn Sandbox once again, which is 100% free, but gives you very limited and very restricted labs environment. Another one could be your Azure Pass, which is giving you $100 credit limit for 30 days, and you can pretty much do anything, any kind of Azure service you'd like to explore. All right. Another thing which is important, that what we would be getting, what you would be receiving as part of this particular session, as part of enrolling yourself into the session, you'll be having that as the recorded videos down there, and the URL will be shared with you once the session gets over. This entire session is getting recorded. At the same point of time, you'd be having the practice quizzes. You'll be having some of the practice exams from us, which can help you prepare, kind of get to know what kind of questions, the exam pattern that's going to appear into your exam, the AZ-900 preps. You'll be receiving an Azure pass, which will help you getting up and running in terms of hands-on labs practices. You'd be having a promotional code, a kind of a buy one get one kind of things. At any point of time you would like to register with us in any further programs, training programs, that can help you reducing the cost by 50%. So the team will send you all that information down there. You'd be having a completion certificate. Being Microsoft Gold partners, you'd be having your official completion certificate for this AZ-900 training or any other no-cost events what we provide down there. Official curriculum is another thing. I assume by now you must have received your ebook, which is a Microsoft official curriculum for AZ-900 right across in there. A few of the things are dependent, so make sure by today end of the day, the team will be sending you an evaluation survey, the end of training survey link. Make sure you fill up that and then provide us your valuable inputs, because depending on whatever responses we are collecting over there, only these two things, the promo code and Azure Pass, will be given to you based on your survey. Make sure you complete that survey request down there. Apart from that, every other thing is absolutely available to you. All right. So this was a very quick thing, which was talking about our Microsoft Azure Cloud, a beginner's guide in terms of the introductory module 00 kind of thing down there. Let's start working with the very first module, which talks about exploring your Microsoft Azure cloud concepts. In this particular module, we would be discussing various things. One of the important thing is, why do you require cloud computing? What exactly the reasons? What are the factors which can change the decision-making process in terms of adopting the cloud, and which services are right now optimal to be used in there? You would also be discussing the cloud models. What is a public cloud? What is a private cloud? What is a hybrid cloud scenarios? Which one's suiting best for which options, and pretty much to which type of audiences down there, the segmentation of the customers. We would be talking about some of the cloud services as well. What is my infrastructure as a service concept? What is my platform as a service? What is my software as a service concepts down there? We would be getting all those things coming up in this particular module down here. Okay, so let's start with the very first lesson, which is talking about why the cloud services appearing right up in here, why we should be utilizing cloud interfaces, whether it's your private cloud, public cloud, or hybrid cloud scenarios. In this lesson, we would be discussing the common cloud computing services. We would exploring the benefits of cloud computing. What additional benefits does cloud computing provides in there? Now, be remember one thing, guys, whatever theoretical concepts or terminologies we are going to discuss in this particular module, in the subsequent modules, we would practically be implementing that by hands-on demonstrations in form of demonstrations by myself. All right, so let's understand the very first thing, which is talking about cloud computing. What exactly cloud computing is, how it can be beneficial. So very important things about that. Whenever we talk about considering all those factors, in case of any cloud, whether it's your private cloud or public cloud or hybrid cloud, some of the terms you would hear very often, one of them is compute. So when I say compute, let's talk about the layman's term. At the very basic layman's terminology, a compute could be referred as the combination of your compute power and the memory. So in very basic terms, I'm having a very small laptop in front of me that's providing me an i7 processor, that's providing me 16 gig of RAM. That's my compute. If I scale it up a little bit, I have 10 different servers with me. The servers are coming up with Xeon processors with n number of cores, and the servers are coming up with n number of DIMMs, pretty much the RAM or the memory associated with them. So consolidated, let's say I've got 64 physical cores, which is giving me a total of 128 virtual cores with hyper-threading enabled, and I'm having 512 gig of memory. So that's my compute over here. So irrespective of whether you're talking about yourself, whether you're talking about a small scale organization with on-prem servers, whether you're talking about mid to large scale enterprises with big data centers associated with them, or whether you talk about any of the public cloud provider, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's AWS, whether it's Google Cloud or IBM Cloud down there, pretty much every single terminology related to cloud is dependent on these particular factors. So compute talks about the processing power along with the memory associated with that. We've got the second concept, which is storage, and really very important. Well, as the name suggests, pretty much where we are going to store our data. And when I talk about data, this is the age of data abundance. So because the data is growing exponentially each and every passing day. Having said that, it could be my structured data, it could be my semi-structured data, it could be my unstructured data. But the question comes up is where I'm going to store that. That is going to be some sort of storage device. At a very small scale, that could be your local hard drive associated with your workstation or laptop. Or for small scale organizations, that could be my storage area network, that could be my file shares, that could be my network attached storage down there. Or big enterprises, I can talk about my storage services down there, which we would be discussing in the upcoming module, that how storages can help us. What is blob storage? What is Azure storage account? What is Azure data lake in form of cloud computing? What's my data factory, and how we can associate all those data related components all together for storage purposes. So that's another factor which talks about whether you should be considering on-prem solutions versus your public cloud situations down there. The next in the segment talks about networking. And this is really important because that sets you pretty much what is going to be your network topologies, what's going to be my virtual network switches, what is going to be my network security groups, what firewall policies am I applying, what's my inbound, outbound rules. So it doesn't really matter whether it's your on-prem infrastructure or whether it's over the cloud or whether it's in hybrid situation down there. Networking is something which will always be configuring at ease down there. Analytics these days is a huge in demand. And when you say so, some of you might be aware about SQL Server analysis services or maybe your Oracle BI business intelligence solutions, which can help you creating, deploying cubes, facts, measures, all technical terms to achieve one bigger goal, which is getting analysis on your historical data, generating reports out of them, helping you on the forecasting down there, working up on your budgeting scenarios, and then having your KPIs tracking, your key performance indicators and all. And we can do that over public clouds as well. And Microsoft provides you great set of tools to perform those analytics on your historical data out there. And that could be on your real-time streams as well with event hubs and pretty much when we talk about the Azure Databricks and all, I can pretty much do it on my real-time data streams as well. We would be discussing that in the upcoming modules. So when I talk about some of the cloud providers, it could be Microsoft, Amazon, Google, some small scale providers as well, pretty much known as the third party on-prem infrastructure providers down there. But majority, when you talk about the public cloud providers, I've got my Microsoft Azure, I've got my Amazon AWS services, I've got my Google Cloud down there. So all these cloud providers are primarily focused on these four major pillars, which we would be discussing in much more detail in the upcoming slides and modules down there. Okay, so let's understand a very little bit of things. So personally, what I try to do in all my sessions, let's do a little bit more hands-on, because sometimes you already know the concepts, but you don't know how do we navigate through those particular options down there, what different tools and tips we should be utilizing along with the best practices and all. So we would be having multiple walkthroughs where I'll be taking you to my Azure portal and start demonstrating some of the things as they come into the picture. So let's have a very small exercise which talks about a quick portal tour about Microsoft Azure, what options you can have it on the portal in terms of quick navigation. So let's take an example. They're asking us to go portal.azure.com. One thing I want to tell you that in my previous couple of slides back, I activated an Azure Pass, and I did it from the very scratch, from the very start. And that pretty much takes me over here, which is asking me to start the tour. Well, being an intermediate or an expert audience, you always might want to skip that up. But being a beginner, it's always good you click on the start tour. That will give you a few tips that this is the place where you should be creating the resources down there. You go next talking about the home area where you can see your services listed. You have your dashboards associated. You have your favorites coming up in here. You've got all these areas coming up where you should be searching that. So we'll be discussing all that. It's always good to have it as an absolute beginner, that a guide to the quick navigation of the portal access. Let me close it. The very first thing is I activated one Azure promotional subscription. Now, I would like to see that where my subscription actually comes up. So let me click on the subscriptions very first thing, and then I'll start exploring about the portal options, the navigational options down there. So you will notice the moment I've successfully activated my Azure Pass, I'm seeing my Azure Pass sponsorship as the name of the subscription, which can be renamed if you want, a unique subscription ID, which cannot be changed, a global unique identifier. And currently, because I activated that, so I'm currently treated as an account admin with full access. As and when the cost will start incurring on when we'll be deploying the resources and all, we'll be able to analyze that cost right from here, and that's currently active. So that's fine. Important thing is you can have multiple subscriptions in a realistic environment. And we will be discussing that situations in module number 3 today, post lunch, talking about single tenant, multiple subscriptions, grouping them into management groups and multiple things down there. Okay, let me go to home, and the very first thing on the UI, I'm clicking on this hamburger menu down here. And when you see that, I can create a resource as the name suggests. Home is pretty much equivalent as you click on Microsoft Azure, taking you to your home page where these options will be listed. I'll see all the services. I've got some favorite services added by default. Important thing to notice, you're seeing 4 different rows. By default, these icons are appearing over here, then the navigation area, the tools, and some of the useful links along with mobile apps download icons down there. So let's understand that. That's the by default thing you'll always be getting. What I would like to do on the global search option, let's say I would like to do for an API connections, and I click on the API connections, I can create, we'll do lots of things, but that's not the purpose of this demonstration. Let me take you home and let me show you what the actual purpose is. I searched for API connections, and you're seeing it right over here at the very first thing as the most recently accessed resource type. Okay. What if I'm looking for function apps and I click over here, doesn't matter whether I do anything or not, I'm going back home, and now I see the API connections, I'll start seeing function apps appearing right across in there. At the same time, if I say Azure Key Vaults, for example, and doesn't matter if I want to create them or utilize them, I'm going back over there, I'm seeing my key vaults appearing over here at the same point of time. If I would like to see my Azure Data Factory, for example, let me click on my data factories coming back. So one thing you will notice that the most recently accessed resource type will appear over here automatically. What was coming before, that's the by default behavior, but as frequently you'll start changing your resource types, they'll start appearing right over here. Okay, another important thing, anywhere on top of anything, if you hover your mouse, That's the recent enhancement which Microsoft did pretty much last year. And now you will see that's my data factories. You can create that. You will see multiple details listed. If I'm hovering on top of virtual machines, for example, now you see that I have the virtual machine as the resource. I've got the descriptions about that, some of the free training options from Microsoft. So that's the embedded artificial intelligence which Microsoft put up with every single resource type in Azure. So you see some of the free training materials down there, some of the useful links which can help you get started about virtual machines, some of the free virtual machines which you can deploy on Azure with absolutely zero cost. So it is important to understand anywhere, if you hover on top of anything, the embedded AI will always appear and will show you that intelligent related features and links down there. Okay, that is the very first thing. Second, the navigational options which you're seeing over here, which is talking about subscriptions, resource group, all resources and dashboards, that's not going to change. That's like a fixed icons over there. And as the name suggests, this would be the subscriptions which we were seeing, the list of subscriptions. We would be creating resource group in few moments from now. We would be having our dashboard, which you can see and start customizing it if you want. At the same point of time, you can see all of the resource listed. Some of the tools gives you, taking you to Microsoft Learn, which is a free no-cost learning site from Microsoft, giving you plenty of videos and hands-on exercises down there. Azure Monitor, if you'd like to monitor your resources as part of your Azure infrastructure. Security Center, we would be discussing today. Cost management, we'd be having on module number 4, and some of the useful links right over there. And of course, you can get your Azure portal mobile app, whether it's from iOS or Android marketplace, you can get it right from there. That's the first thing about the navigational overview. What you're seeing on the top, it is a global search. And when I say global search, let me show you something. If I'm saying subscriptions over here and you click on subscriptions, related things comes up over here. At any point of time, if you want to create something related to MySQL, Azure database for MySQL servers, you'll see the related and the marketplace resources as well. So you'll see the Azure native services along with the ISVs, independent software vendors provided marketplace options components down there. So we will analyze and we will discuss that global search functionality a lot of time during today. Important thing next is you see that small icon which says Cloud Shell. Now, when you're working on Azure, you would like to create some resources, you'd like to change some settings, you'd like to deploy or get listing or anything. You can do it from the portal, number one. You can do it from Azure CLI using Bash Shell. You can do it from PowerShell. You can do it from API. Your developers can do it by calling it to Visual Studio in form of REST-based services. So Cloud Shell will open an interface which will help you working up on Azure Cloud Shell commandlets right over here, whether it's Bash, whether it's PowerShell. So it's important to understand if you are familiar in terms of Linux being your preferred background, you might would like to work with Bash Shell down there, the Bash scripting and all. And if Windows Server is pretty much your background is, or working up with Microsoft product line, PowerShell might be your preferred tool. Doesn't really make any difference because whatever I can do with the Bash scripts, I can do it the same thing with Azure PowerShell as well. And that will help me creating anything with scripts or deploying my ARM templates or anything. We would be discussing that later on. So how am I opening that? Well, I'm simply clicking on that Cloud Shell icon and that comes up right over here. You can always adjust that. Another way of doing the same thing is I'm going on shell.azure.com. That will take me to the same Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI. We would discuss that. So whether you're doing it from the Cloud Shell icon or you're clicking on shell.azure.com, that's pretty much taking us right across at the same time with the same set of tools. We would be discussing that in the upcoming demonstrations. At the same time, this is my directory filter. If you have multiple subscriptions and you would like to apply some filters on some of the tenants or some of the subscriptions, you can always do that. Currently, I have only one simple tenant over here and one Azure Pass subscription applied on top of that. So my current directory is this one where I'm working. It is important to understand that whenever for the very first time, let's say I've got ABC Inc. and I'm creating an account with abc.com. So it would be like abc.onmicrosoft.com. And later on, we can add a custom domain and set that up the CNAMEs and all the listings. And that will replace your corporate domain right across in here. Currently, because it was an Outlook account, that's my email address, outlook.onmicrosoft.com is the current directory which is listed in here. At the same time, the notifications will give you the ongoing notifications about success, failures, information, warnings, and all those things down there. You would like to change some themes, some access, some of the options down there. You can always do it from here. At the same time, you would like to open a support ticket from being a corporate customer. You can always do it right from here using help and support options. And that's where I'm currently logged in with this particular account right across in there. Well, this was a very small demonstration, which is talking about the portal access. Let me take you back to my PowerPoint presentation, which was talking about have your browser opened, navigate to portal.azure.com, and we discussed a couple of options in terms of navigational overview where what kind of things will be appearing on the portal and how we can pretty much do that. Can you find where to create a resource like a virtual machine? Quite simple. You can do it from the global search if you want. You can go to virtual machines and create it from there. You can create a resource right from here if you want. And if you've added that to your favorites, you can do it from here. It's like one reference which you can pretty much navigate at multiple places and have your resources deployed right from there. Okay, that was the very first thing, guys, which was talking about a navigational overview of Microsoft Azure Cloud. At the same point of time, we are also discussing some of the key cloud concepts. And that is really important to understand why anybody should prefer or would prefer public cloud over an on-prem infrastructure, an on-premise infrastructure down there. The very first thing is high availability. Well, how highly available your Azure resources are, or what additional investments you have to do if you want to make them highly available in your on-prem infrastructure, that could really make a difference. And depending on the type of the resource as well. For example, if you have a web application which is hosted on your on-prem servers, you want to make them highly available. We are talking about your IIS clustering or a web server failover clusterings down there. That will involve multiple virtual machines to be deployed with the same role, creating load balancer and plenty of things down there. I can do the same thing over Azure as well. Some of the things which needs to be considered is the amount of effort in terms of work hours, what is going to be the additional costing involved, what's going to be your capacity planning, but I can achieve it in on-prem scenarios as well, in a public cloud scenarios as well. In case of public cloud, it is more efficient, it is more cost efficient, that's more worth in terms of less time for deployment and manageability, because we are following a shared responsibility pattern, which I'll be discussing in the next module. Fault tolerance, if anything goes wrong, what's going to be your fault tolerance policy, how you'd like to apply that, how the scalability actually works. If the requirement comes up, I'm seeing humongous and or pretty much, I would say, exponential amount of traffic on my web application in the peak winter months down there, then how scalable your application is. Are you manually going to scale that, or have you applied some sort of auto scaling properties associated with that? And both are possible when we talk about the cloud concept. It's available in on-prem as well. It's more efficient and pretty much more easy to deploy when we talk about over any of the public cloud provider. What's my elasticity? Sometimes having a dedicated database server for everything is a good approach, but can prove much more costly in terms of the cost associated with that. So it's always good if we can have some sort of elastic pools or some sort of shared containers where we can deploy our Azure resources that can help us decreasing the cost while not impacting the performance a lot at the same time. We'll be discussing that. The global reach, pretty much availability, or if I would like to see some sort of globally distributed solutions or some turnkey factors with exceptionally low latencies down there, I can always consider global reach functionalities down there. We'll be having that. The customer latency capabilities, what kind of latencies are we currently facing and how we are planning to get them reduced over the longer run. At the same time, how agile the product is, what's the agility comes up when we talk about our Azure cloud associated with that. What's my predictive cost considerations, what was my budget and what's my current cost, and if we are spending at the same rate, what is going to be my cost forecastings associated to my resources. Azure Cloud can give you those in your cost dashboard at a flick of a minute down there, and you can pretty much be able to get your cost analysis at the same dashboard. What's your disaster recovery checklist, and how efficient or how efficient they are in terms of whether it's your on-prem resources, whether you have some AWS resources, whether you have some Google Cloud resources, and if you have Azure disaster recovery site, you're pretty much your DR site down there, how efficiently you're managing that, what's your application policies, and what's my DR checklists down there. At the same time, what kind of security the potential cloud provider will provide in terms of ensuring the data breach is not happening, the data is secure, and what kind of additional security apart from the regular things which we were using in our on-prem scenarios. So when we talk about a couple of things to discuss about the public cloud, an important thing comes into the picture is the economies of scale. And let's understand that being a very small scale organization, I might be talking about just 2 or maybe up to 5 servers down the line, couple of networking equipments, 1 or 2 storage appliances, and that's it. If I increase the scale, considering a mid to large scale organization where I'm talking about 10 to 15 different data centers at different geographical locations, and I'm talking about huge number of resources available to us. At the same point of time, if you consider the economies of scale of these public cloud providers, whether it's Microsoft Azure, whether it's AWS or Google Cloud, they are so huge, especially when I talk about Azure's expansion, when we talk about the expansion on different regions, different geographies, multiple zones, and number of data centers availabilities down there. So cloud providers can definitely reduce the cost and gain efficiencies when operating at a large scale. And those reducing those cost factors can be transferred to the end users. So if you're achieving something in on-prem in $X, it's completely possible you're having at least 30 to 40% reduction in cost if you're opting for the cloud provider to move that resource in the cloud. So because of not because of you're talking about different architecture or different policies down there, it's because the massive amount of compute and storage and the infrastructure which is available with those cloud providers, they can give you those resources at much reduced cost because of the capacity, or because they're operating at that much large scale down there. At the very same time, we've got our capital expenditures, we've got our operating expenditures down there. And these are some of the business terms down there to understand, but in a layman's terminology, the capital expenditure is pretty much a deciding factor why most of organizations today are shifting over to the cloud. So capital expenditure is because it requires a high upfront cost. It requires a value of investment, which will reduces over the time. Let's take a very small example of this particular approach. Being a very small scale customer, I would like to deploy a web app, and that's just it. My only requirement is I would like to have my web application, and to elaborate it a little better, that will be connected to my database server, and getting some of the information exchanges, data pull and push operations down there. Now, it is important to understand this is the only requirement. And if we talk about an on-prem infrastructure, and let's say Windows is our preferred infrastructure, I'm going to talk about have some servers available, networking and storage equipments, making sure they are into the virtualization engine, multiple VMs to make them highly available and scalable down there. And we are talking about high upfront cost for procuring the hardware. And more importantly, when we talk about the operational expenditures, when we would be managing those products and services, we would be requiring resources who can do it on behalf of us, or we can recruit some of the people who can do those managements down there. So that's an operational cost. We need to provide some coolings to our on-prem resources, the capacity buildings, electricity consumptions and all. So all these costs which are ongoing in nature, we are considering that into our operational costs down there, operational expenditures down there. So in capital expenditure, the cost is right up front to procure the hardware, plan your capacity, and then start working. In case of a cloud provider, for example, that goes on subscription-based models. So you only pay what you use, and then you scale it up or scale it down, and accordingly your cost is going to reflect at your billing statements. So when we talk about the consumption-based model, which is one of the key factors why we are, or majority of small scale or mid-scale customers are shifting towards cloud these days, because it's a consumption-based model. Depending on the type of resource, depending on the scalability of those resources, and depending on the auto scaling, upscaling or downgrades over there, you only pay for the resources you use. That's quite simple down there. So when we talk about the very first lesson, it was talking about why we should be focusing on the clouds rather than having it in on-prem. Well, there could be 20 different scenarios when on-premises is the only available option. It might be compatibility, it might be the legacy software issues, it might be the infrastructure so huge, not feasible to move it to the cloud or anything. But there are a number of reasons available to that why we should start considering cloud. May not be fully, but for some of our partial services today. So we've got some of the more links available, which I'll be mailing you. I'll be giving you these slide decks as well over your emails. So you can pretty much have access to these additional links, which will take you to for different things available on Microsoft Docs. Okay, let's move to the next segment over here, which is talking about the different type of cloud models which are available to us and how we can start utilizing them. So important thing is the very first thing we've got here is our public cloud. Okay. First, as the name suggests, public cloud, it is owned by a cloud service or a hosting provider. All right. Important thing is it is providing you the resources and the services to multiple organizations and users. So it's not only for internal use, we are providing those services, offering those services to our external customers as well. Okay. It is accessed via a secured network connection, typically over the internet, HTTPS embedded, the certificates, additional keys and encryptions on behind that over there. That's fine. Some of the examples, I've got Microsoft Azure, a public cloud, Google Cloud is a public cloud, Amazon AWS is a public cloud. Well, when we talk about the private cloud infrastructure, so it's like organization creates a cloud environment in their data center. And that's what we call a private cloud. It's quite simple. I've got 200 different servers. I've got 80 different networking equipments. I've got 60 different storage appliances. And with the combination of all those things, I built an infrastructure which is having the web applications as well, which is having the virtual machines as well, which is having the VPN connectivities as well, which is having an external facing RDP as well, authentication authorizations in place. So everything what you're expecting to be on the public cloud, we can achieve it. But the important thing is it's only for our organization itself. So having said that, it's for internal usage purposes, or even if we are utilizing it over the internet, that's pretty much the organization specific people or the authenticated users are doing it. It's not open for anybody else to subscribe or start utilizing that. So organizations are completely responsible for operating the services they provide when you talk about a private cloud infrastructure. The third one, which is more famous these days, is a hybrid cloud scenario. Now, what it does, it technically combines the public cloud and the private cloud to have those applications deployed either on on-prem locations or over the cloud infrastructure. For example, being a training organization, we are currently utilizing hybrid cloud scenarios. We've got 3 different data centers across the globe, and we are distributing lab accesses to students over to the nearest data centers. And some of our services are available on Azure as well. Some of our applications are hosted on AWS as well. So we are a hybrid cloud where we are utilizing our private infrastructure combined with the public cloud capabilities down there. So when you talk about comparing those things one by one, in case of public cloud, there is no capital expenditure to scale up. So there is no upfront cost whatsoever. So you subscribe based on your subscription model, you pay for the resources you consume. And applications can quickly be provisioned and deprovisioned. And we would be doing that a lot in our second module today. Organizations pay only for what they use. So it's like a subscription-based model, platform as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, any kind of components you want to deploy. A private cloud is organizations will have absolutely complete control over the resources they are deployed or they are managing. They have complete control over security of those as well. So it's 100% on them. Sometimes some of the resources can take more time to deploy on private cloud than to the public cloud, or it could be vice versa as well. When I talk about the hybrid cloud, that provides you the most flexible option. In terms of flexibility, that's giving me pretty much everything, the combination of public and private cloud altogether. Being an organization, we would determine where to run those applications down there, over on-prem or over the cloud, what's suiting best to them. And we control the security, compliance, or any legal requirement, the GDPR, the PCC compliance, or PCI compliance over there. Any kind of additional security needs to be deployed, we'd be deciding that. All right. So important thing in public cloud, pretty much you don't have controls. You have very limited controls because we are working on a shared responsibility model. In private cloud, I've got 100% control on my resources in terms of what needs to be done to them. At the hybrid cloud, this is most flexible, giving you the options where you should be deploying those resources. Important thing because there would be questions coming up, the differences between these cloud models into your AZ-900 exam. At the same point of time, that was the lesson which was talking about some of our cloud services. Now let's understand the different cloud services, what we have theoretically, and post this lesson, we would be doing all of them with the hands-on, start deploying them over to our Azure portal. So let's have it. We have the shared responsibility model over here, what we would be discussing. And this is very critical to understand when you're beginning your cloud journey in terms of how you should be utilizing and start working right across in there. At the same time, we would be reviewing infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service cloud model as well. And we would also be deciding which services are best depending on the situation, depending on where we should start utilizing them. So let's understand the shared responsibility model over here. Let's understand it on a different scale. I'm talking about on-prem, and this is my private cloud because all the resources are deployed internally by the organization itself. Then I talk about the public cloud, which is infrastructure as a service, where the compute and storage component involves down there. I'm talking about platform as a service. I'm talking about software as a service, and we would be having some examples of each of those cloud components as well. Important thing to notice, anything which is green over here, That's pretty much what we manage being an organization or a user. And anything which comes up as blue, that's being managed by the cloud providers. In this case, that's going to be Microsoft Azure. So in case of on-prem, so let's understand it this way. I've got my storage listed over here. That's the storage appliance or the storage devices where I'm actually going to store my data, my corporate data associated to that. I've got my networking equipments on top of that. To have my network firewalls, to have my virtual switches, virtual networks, VPN deployments and all. I've got my compute associated over here, which is my processing power and the memory. On the combination of all three will help me create virtual machines down there. Virtual machines will be having the guest operating systems on top of that. Will be having a runtimes associated with them. On top of them, I will be running the applications, the web apps, the database applications, exchange servers, mail exchangers, and all. And whatever applications will be there, they will be generating the data, and I'll be having the access policies, how the data is going to be accessed down there. So in case of on-prem, everything from bottom to top is managed by the organization itself, because that's not a cloud, that's a private cloud where the organization manages each and everything. And the good thing about it is I've got 100% control over the resource deployments and all those policies listed in here. At the same time, let's understand infrastructure as a service. So when I say the virtual machine, the OS, runtime, application, data access, anything related to infrastructure, we are going to manage it being a user over in Azure as well. But the base underlying infrastructure, whether it's my storage, networking, and compute, that will always be managed by Microsoft Azure, which is the cloud provider in our case. Now, at the same point of time, when we understand platform as a service over here, so in case of platform as a service, let's say I've got Office 365. So I don't need to worry about what VM or operating system Office 365 is using in the backend actually, what clusters they're using in the backend actually. I'm not really concerned about that because these all things are managed by Microsoft Azure. I only need to take care of my applications and the data access related to that. At the same point of time, let's understand software as a service. In this case, I'm talking about a SQL Azure, a RDBMS database server, which is hosted on my Azure platform. Having said that, I only need to consider my data I'm storing in form of databases, tables and all, and the access policies and all. Remaining everything comes up over here is the responsibility of the cloud provider. So this particular slide over here, giving you all these options and talking about who is going to be responsible for these type of resources. Is it going to be you or is it going to be the cloud provider? In case of on-prem, it's completely us because we'd be managing that infrastructure and the applications on top of that. In case of clouds, depending on infrastructure as a service or platform as a service and a software as a service, this is how the table flows actually in there. So that was my shared responsibility model, which comes up with almost every cloud provider today. Let's understand infrastructure as a service. So when I talk about infrastructure as a service, anything related to servers or storage, anything related to networking, firewall security, virtual networks, VPN gateways, Azure Express route or anything comes up with the data center or the physical building wherever Microsoft Azure data center is, all these things, my storage, compute, and the networking is considered as infrastructure as a services component down there. So you build the pay-as-you-go IT infrastructure by renting those servers, creating virtual machines on top of them, having your storage, networks, and operating systems from the cloud provider itself. At the same time, when I talk about platform as a service, that's another major component for any cloud computing cloud solution provider today. A platform as a service talks about, hey, we're going to take care about the storage, the networking, and the compute, even the virtual machines and the operating system. You just start working on the ideal platform you're looking to have. For example, one of the requirement is I would like to have a web application deployed. And this is the very first thing. My web application has been developed by the developers, and now we need to deploy it. In case of an on-prem situation, I'm going to have a virtual machine for that, which would be on top of a physical server with the processor, memory, and storage associated. Then I'll be installing a guest operating system. Depending on the runtime I require, whether it's Linux or Windows, I'm always going to do that. At the same point of time, I'm going to have those options listed. I'll be having the web app deployed. So a small example is just to incorporate that, just to create a web app, I have to start developing and deploying so many components associated with that. And I need to provision a whole new set of servers for availabilities and all. Well, in case of a platform as a service, doesn't matter. Let's go with Azure App Services. They'll give you everything, whatever you require, whether it's compute, storage, networking, whether it's related upgrades or pretty much deployment slots or anything related to that, we can go over there. Office 365 is an excellent example, which gives you platform as a service component associated. So anything which is on a pay-as-you-go model or subscription-based model where you pay per user per month can be considered as a platform as a service component down there. Now, let's understand the software as a service over here. So when you talk about a complete set of softwares, I've got my Office 365 collection of Office suites down there. I've got my email calendars. I've got my SQL server hosted over the cloud. I've got my MySQL servers down there, the RDBMS databases. I can start considering them as my software as a service components of any of those cloud computing technologies. All these things together, the infrastructure as a service is the most flexible cloud service. Deploy whatever you want, manage it the way you want, and have your applications the way you want. You configure the manage, you pretty much, we will be configuring it and we will be managing the hardware for the applications, not in terms of physical management of hardware, but in terms of if we need to increase the number of processors, if we need to increase the amount of memory, have some additional network policies applied on top of that. So it'll be done by us in case of infrastructure as a service as per my shared responsibility model. At the same time, the platform as a service talks about you just focus on the application development. The platform, whatever you require, IaaS or Linux or any kind of other web servers down there, that's already provided as part of Azure App Services. You just develop it and deploy it right across to Azure. At the same point of time, the software as a service is pay-as-you-go pricing model. For example, you've got your Office 365, you've got multiple things. So users will pay for the software they use on the subscription model and not an upfront cost for all the server license, the client user license, thousands of users can access that. So you only pay for what you use in there. At the same point of time, this was the very first thing, guys, which was talking about how and how my cloud model is pretty much implemented and how we can start utilizing that at the same time. So once again, to have a quick recap, what we did, we discussed about the shared responsibility model, what needs to be managed by us, and what's going to be the responsibility of the cloud provider, in this case, Microsoft Azure. We reviewed some of the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service cloud models dependencies down there. And that is my very first module, which is talking about the basic cloud concepts associated at the same time. Important thing, how do we utilize those services? How do we start working with them? That is something we would be discussing right over here into the portal when we will start creating those particular options along. Now, the very first thing what we did is we discussed about some of the cloud concepts in terms of practical exposure. The only thing we do right now is we're aware about the navigational overview of how Microsoft Azure portal is structured at this point of time. And we would be discussing plenty of, I would say lots of demonstrations in the second module down here. So let me take you to my PowerPoint presentation over here, guys. And as part of this, we've got a very small quiz over here. The purpose of that is to have kind of a test your knowledge what we have just learned so far, and that will also give you a very small idea about what kind of questions you should be expecting into the exam as far as multiple choice questions or case studies are concerned. So for this one, we can do one quick thing over here. I'm going to share you the link over the chat to everyone over here. So when I talk about a test your knowledge for the very first module, I've shared you a link. This is a quiz. You guys can start working on that, and maybe let's have a quick 15 minutes over here for your tea and coffee, and let's resume it at 10:30 Eastern. By that time, hopefully you'll be able to complete your quiz, and we'll start working with the second module with lots of hands-on exposures, the practical demonstrations of Azure Cloud Services. So I've just shared the link to everyone. Feel free to do that. Have your skills checked over there. Some of the sample questions are related to the first module only, and I should see you 10:30 Eastern, starting up with the second module, which would talk about working up on Azure core services. All right, enjoy your break, guys. Should see you in 15 minutes from now. Hey everyone, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed your tea and coffee break and you got some chance to quickly work up on some of the quizzes for the very first module, which was the cloud concept. Well, actually, you might be thinking these are relatively easy questions. Well, they are because that's primarily entry level exam. And one more thing, just in case if you were not able to complete that quiz, I'll resend that link to everyone. And also, those questions are available at the end of every module on your ebooks as well, the ebooks which were sent to you earlier today. Okay, so let's proceed to the next segment over here. We are starting up with the second module where we would be talking about different Azure core services, and that would involve plenty of demonstrations as well. So in this module, we would be discussing four different lessons down the line. The Azure architectural components, theoretically, what is a region, what's a zone, what's a physical data center, and the combination of those regions will make the geographies down there. What's the availability and the resources down there at the same time? What are my core Azure services? Some of them related to infrastructure as a services, virtual machines, networking, data storage components down there, some of my IoT, AI, data analytics, Azure machine learnings and all, DevOps, some of the Azure function apps, the serverless compute and the app services, creating and deploying web applications down there. At the same point of time, working up with Azure management, creating your resources from a PowerShell, CLI, ARM templates, or from the portal. That's what we would be discussing as part of module number 2. So let's start with the very first lesson where we would be discussing up the Azure infrastructure and different SLAs the Azure provides. What's the composite SLAs, and we'll be discussing them in here. So let's talk about the regions first. So if you take a look, when we talk about US West, West Central, US government taxes, the China Azure China Cloud, I've got East US, I've got Department of Defense, I've got Canada East, I've got different regions down there. So worldwide, there are 50 plus regions representing 140 different countries, and our region will have multiple data centers in it, of course. So what exactly does that mean? Let me take you to my Azure portal real quick over here. And right across, whenever you are planning to deploy any of your resource. So let's say if I'm creating a resource group, which we would be discussing later on, it's a logical container of the grouping of various Azure resources. So let me click add over here. And important thing is under which subscription I'm creating that particular resource group. What's going to be the name? So let me call it my AZ-900 D01, whatever I would like to name it. I have to ensure that's unique in this subscription only. And there it comes when we talk about the region. So it's applicable to every single Azure resource, whether it's your virtual machine, your web apps, your function apps, your IoT event hubs, whether it's related to any kind of Azure resources down there, the region would be applicable to every other thing down there. So let's say I'm specifying it's going to be at my East US. So let me just have it over here. I'm talking about my East US. That's where I'm deploying it. Let me review and create. I haven't passed any tags or anything. That's not mandatory at now. Let me create that. So I'm creating a resource group. I might be creating a virtual machine. I might be creating a storage account. I might be creating a SQL Azure, any kind of Azure resource. The important thing is everywhere the region is going to be an important and always a required field. So if you take a look, let's say if I'm on my virtual machines, I'm not going to create one. I'm just showing you a blade over here. So when I click on a virtual machine down there, an important thing is in which resource group you'll be deploying it. And then when it comes to the region, on which region I'm going to place that infrastructure as a service resource. So it is important to understand that we've got 50 plus regions down there representing 140 countries with lots of physical data centers. So it definitely provides flexibility and scalability. and we would be discussing on the availability sets, the zones, and then replication policies and multiple things down there. It preserves your data residencies where the data is going to be presides down there. Ideally, as a thumb of rule, unless it's really a different best practice, as a thumb of rule, you should be selecting the region which is nearest to your users. So you should be selecting the regions which are going to be close to your users, irrespective of any type of resource what you deploy over Azure, whether it's a web apps for low latencies, high performance, or availability concerns, whether it's related to your virtual machines, you should be having them nearest to the users who would be utilizing them the most. What if my users are distributed geographically and I would like to have a low latency turnkey solutions for them? Well, Microsoft provides that. Cosmos DB can be an example over there, and we'll discuss those scenarios as well. So regions are quite important. So when you talk about the region pairs, the regions are by default pairs over there. So the Azure region is paired with another region by default. For example, anybody's creating or deploying a resource in East US, and I'm having my replication policy enabled region wise, by default pairs for that going to be West US down there. So whatever the nearest region is, Microsoft's getting a pair associated with that. So you can see the regions are pretty much paired with each other when we talk about having them coming up in there. At the same point of time, we talk about geographies. So let's talk about, I've got the geographies listed in there. I can have multiple regions into a single geography. For example, North America, I could have my East US, I can have my West US, I can have my Central US region, I can have my Canada West region, Canada Central region. So I've got multiple regions into the same geography. So it's easy to understand. My geography comes on the top, then I'm going to have my regions down there. Underneath my regions, I'm going to have my zones associated with that. And zones is a collection of physical data centers where my physical data centers actually are. So when I talk about the discrete markets that preserves data and you need to have your compliance boundaries, so geography sometimes plays an important role. For example, if I'm creating any legacy web app, migrating over to Azure, but I have to compliant with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Rules from within the European Union, or I have to be PCI compliant within a dedicated geographical locations. So having said that, geographies plays an important role where the data residency must be in there based on the local regulatories from the local respective governments. And apart from that, what additional policies are we going to deploy to maintain that compliance so data resides within the region pointing to a specific geography? All right. Now let's understand some of my SLAs. When I talk about the service level agreements at the same point of time, my service level agreement talks about what SLAs Microsoft's provide. And you'd be amused to see that Microsoft's giving you the top-notch SLAs in terms of availability. Sometimes it's 99.69 at the precision place when we talk about my storage applications on the geographical redundant policies. We'll be discussing that along within the program in here. So let's understand that. For example, I have a single virtual machine where I can easily do a lift and shift kind of things to that VM over the cloud. My VM SLA is 99.9% with the premium storage down there. And if I'm placing multiple VMs in an availability set over there, so I'm protecting the data center failures among within data centers down there. I'm doing it into availability sets. My SLA from Microsoft is 99.95%. At the same time, if I'm talking about apart outside my physical data centers, but then I have my zones associated over there. If I'm doing it in my availability zones, my SLA is 99.99% up to 2 precision places down there. At the same time, I can have my regional pairs, my replications, disaster recovery checklist, or anything associated with that. That is my multi-region disaster recovery. So important thing is with every specific configuration, Microsoft provides you an SLA associated. And what if I'm using multiple services with multiple SLAs associated to that? So having said that, when we talk about the availability sets or when we talk about the availability zones, I've got the concept of FD and UD. The FD stands for my fault domain. The UD stands for my update domain over here. So let's understand for which purposes Microsoft's using these acronyms down there. The update domain is ideally for any scheduled maintenance, any kind of performance or security updates that are sequenced through the update domains over there. So the important thing is when we are creating your availability sets and you're saying, I would like to use 3 fault domains and 2 update domains. So there is going to be 2 different data centers responsible down there within the same region, which would be sequencing those particular updates, making sure your VM never goes down, even if the entire rack goes down over there. You can pretty much have them update domains takes care of the VM replicated to a different rack associated. I've got the fault domains. We would be discussing that the availability sets and domains over there. It is important to understand a very logical concept which talks about our resource groups. Now let's understand what the resource groups are. The resource groups are the logical container. I would say it's not it's not pretty much playing any important role other than storing the metadata, but it's really important to logically group them. So it is a container for multiple resources that share the same life cycle. That's one thing. And when I say container, don't get confused about Dockers or Kubernetes container instances or container registries. They are completely different. The term container here refers to like a logical grouping or a logical container which will hold my Azure resources down there. So it is very important to understand that how these things actually works. So to understand that, on the top, I'm going to have my tenant. So the tenant is pretty much the organization on which we are managing over Azure down there. The tenant will be having a subscription down there. The subscription will be having my resource groups associated, and the resource groups will finally be having the resources underneath them. And it's important to understand how this life cycle actually works. How do we start work and start utilizing all those options in there? So let's understand it the way we would like to make our organizational structure over Azure in terms of resource group subscriptions and all. So I'm taking you to my portal over here, and let's understand how does that work. By default, this is my default directory. So that's my tenant where I'm actually working up right now. Now inside this tenant, I've already got a subscription listed over here, the Azure Pass sponsorship. The next thing I'm doing over here is, let's say I'm creating a new resource group. What should be the name of the resource group? Well, could be anything. Pretty much the best practices is it depends how you want to structure your Azure public cloud infrastructure down there. Sometimes people say, hey, I'm going to have my separate resource group for development workload. I'm going to have my separate resource group for UAT workload or production workload. So let me add a dev RG over here. I'm going to have one more for my test resource group down there. All my testing related resources, apps and things will go over there. I'm going to have one for production. Someone says, not really. I would like to go my Southeast Asia resource group, and my data is going to go up in Australia East down there, or let's come back over here. Let me just store it somewhere else down there. Let's say somewhere in West India, for example. I'm reviewing create. I created this one. I'm going to have my North America resource group. That would be my East Coast associated. Sometimes people say, hey, I would like to create those resource groups based on my business functions. All my consulting related resources will go in here. All my manufacturing related Azure resources will go in here. All my public sector related or service industry related resources will go in here. So it's ideally however you would like to deploy those cluster of logical resource groups, we can always do that. What is important to understand is, can one tenant have multiple subscriptions? So that's the question. Can a single tenant have more than one subscriptions? So I'm going to explain you that, guys. What do you think? Can we have multiple subscriptions in a single tenant? Your answers on the chat. Yep, most of you are absolutely correct. One tenant can have multiple subscriptions. So to understand that, let me open additional browser over here. And this time I'm logging to my portal.azure.com. That will take me to my corporate Azure portal. You can see that I'm logged in with my work email address over here. Important to understand, the name of the tenant here is GTechLearn Private Limited. So the name of the organization down there. Inside this tenant, I have plenty of resources deployed, but let me click on subscriptions and you will see we've got n number of subscriptions over here. I've got some cost associated, the listing of subscriptions and all. So you can see that I've got 8 different subscriptions over here inside a single tenant. So if the question comes up, can one tenant have multiple subscriptions? The answer is absolutely yes. Can a single subscription have multiple resource groups over there? Absolutely, yes. You can always have it. If I go to my corporate Azure portal and I click on the list of resource groups, you will see I have plenty of resource group and some of them are sharing the same subscription. And if I show you the demo, which we were doing today, let me take you to my promotional subscription. I created these resource groups associated over here, 5 different resource group, but they are into the same subscription. So can we have multiple resource group into a same subscription? Absolutely, yes. And my resource group will have n number of resources, whatever you want to deploy. So that's what the presentation meant in here. You can have n number of resources, could be distributed on multiple resource groups. I can have multiple subscriptions over here managed by the management groups, and we can have multi-tenant administration capabilities over there as well. So it is important to understand how does those things actually work. So far, I've just shown you if I need to create a resource group, how do we actually do that? Well, anything you want to do over here on the portal, 4 major ways will always be possible. One, you do it from the portal itself using the GUI. Number 2, you can do it with the Azure CLI. Number 3, you can do it with PowerShell down there. Number 4, you can do it with the API access or doing by programming any kind of IDE or being a developer, you want to do that. So whatever I've done over here so far, I did it from the portal. So let's take an example. I would like to do something from my Cloud Shell, my Azure Cloud Shell. So for this one, I'm moving to shell.azure.com. You can go shell.azure.com like this one, or you can click on this Cloud Shell icon, which will open Cloud Shell into the same browser window. Okay, so the very first thing, it is asking me whether I want to use Bash shell or I want to use PowerShell. Well, ideally, depending on whatever your personal preference is, we can pretty much use the same thing. Over here, let's say I'm clicking on Bash or I'm clicking on PowerShell, that's fine. What is important to know, since we are doing it for the very first time, this dialog you will see only once when you're using Cloud Shell for the very first time on a given subscription, or might be you deleted those storage accounts and you need to recreate it. So, but usually that's once in a lifetime when you'll be seeing that screen. Which subscription I'm using, and this will create a couple of resources for me. A resource group, a storage account, a file share. Well, let me just have it over there. I'm clicking on create that storage. So what it is doing, technically it is creating a storage account and a file share in the resource group in which my Cloud Shell variables, Cloud Shell uploads, Cloud Drive uploads will be stored in there, and I'll see all those options. So for the very first time, it might take 30 to 45 seconds, sometimes a minute or so. And once you're ready, it will launch your Bash shell or PowerShell, whatever we would like to work upon. So it is currently telling me creating. I'm into the resource group area. Let me click on refresh. Now you'll see that I'm creating one Cloud Shell resource over here. Underneath that resource group, I don't see any resources whatsoever because it is in the process of deploying some resources. So if I click into the deployments area, I should be seeing a couple of things. Whatever I'll be deploying, I'll see them listed right over here. That's fine. Let it get completed once. Just wants to make sure it's working up. There we are. It is connecting to that terminal. In the meanwhile, it's working up. let me take you over here. If I click on the storage account, just to let you know, I should be seeing my storage account related to the particular Cloud Shell created over here. That's fine. That's automated. You can rename them by clicking on the advanced settings down there, but that's okay. Let me go over here and I would like to increase my font size. Let me just do it like this one. Now, one thing you will notice, Kuldeep at Azure, I'm already logged in because it's my Cloud Shell and I'm already logged into the portal. So the authentication's just fine. Just in case you want to do it from your local computer, you can download the Azure CLI, or in PowerShell, you can have your Azure PowerShell module downloaded and connect AZ account or AZ login command will do and open the AZ login credentials and you'll be good to go. So here I'm in Bash. Let's take an example what I would like to do. I'm saying AZ is an acronym for the Azure commandlets down there. Important thing is what I would like to create over here. So if I'm saying, for example, I'm clicking on resource group. So I would like to create a resource group over there. Or if you're saying AZRG, that's the resource group, what is going to be the action? You can specify what action you would like to create. So it's all up to us. How do you want to work up on these Azure CLI commands? At the same point of time, if I switch to PowerShell, that will take me to my PowerShell. Let's get logged in once real quick. It's working up. Let's get created once real quick. All right, it's working up. And one thing I would like to tell you guys, sometimes you might think about it's taking forever to switching from PowerShell to Bash or something. So it's an expected behavior of Azure, just in case if you're on shell.azure.com. So you can always refresh it, or if required, you can always restart that the way you want. That's fine. Let me go in here. If I go shell.azure.com, trying to open that, or at the same time, I'm clicking on the Cloud Shell icon over here. That will take me to my Bash shell. And at any point of time you think it's taking longer than expected, feel free to do a quick restart and they'll do the work. That's fine. It's restarting the shell. And that's not a bug or something. That's a cache, sometimes a cache issue over the browser. Clear the cache and retry, or you can always restart, which will take a couple of seconds and the shell will be loaded again. So let's see, it's doing the restart over here. Should be connecting me to PowerShell. Let me close that. Or let's say if I switch myself to Bash, it was starting that up. Let me do that real quick. All right, it is working up. Let's get started and I'll come back onto the same screen. It's starting up. We'll take a little in down there. Okay, so coming back in here, we were talking about some of the core Azure services. Having said that, we created some of the resource group from the portal. I'll be doing it, some of them from Azure CLI, Bash Shell, PowerShell as well. And you can do it from API as well, being calling the REST services over Visual Studio or any of your favorite IDEs, the way you're working. Specifically from the services type, you can have compute, you can have networking, storage, web, mobiles, containers, database, analytics, IoTs, plenty of categories down there, whether it's a virtual machine or an app service or a disk or any application down there. So important thing where you can get them running let me go to my Azure portal. And when you say create a resource, it's going to open that where you can see all those available resource types over Azure, whether you want to categorize them from compute, virtual machine, Kubernetes, web apps, or anything related to containers, anything related to the databases, anything related to your media streaming services and all, anything related to networking, virtual network groups, VPN, Azure Express Route, or anything. So you will see all these options listed. You can go from here as well. You can click all services where you will come back at the same page with these listings coming up all across in there, the way you want to create them. At any point of time, if you want to add the disk, let me click on that favorites icon over here, and that will be available to my favorites area. You'll see the disks appearing over here. I want to restructure them, put it wherever you want, and now it's the first place where you can start creating your Azure drives. So that's one thing they were talking about, some of the resource where you can find them and get them created right from the same place. So let's take an example. I'm in here. It is working up. Let me have shell.azure.com, make sure it's loading up. That's okay. Let me go over here. Let's say I would like to create a virtual machine from the portal. I'll be doing the same thing from Azure CLI as well and PowerShell as well. When I click on add, I'm technically adding a resource. And this is my Azure native services, and I'll be placing that in any of my resource group down there. So important thing is that what is going to be your subscription, in which resource group I'm going to place it. So let's take an example. I'm clicking on AZ-900 D01. That is going to be the resource group where I will be creating this infrastructure as a service virtual machine. What is going to be the name? Let me just specify the name of that particular VM, which will automatically be the host name when the virtual machine gets provisioned. Okay. Important thing, where you are going to deploy that. So by default, that is giving me the region, whatever the region I selected on the Azure group, but I can always change it if you want. So let's say I would like to deploy it on my West US. So I'm specifying the region associated with that. Important thing to notice, the size and the SKU, I'm talking about D2S V3, 2 CPUs, 8 gig of memory. Estimated cost is $85, $85.41 a month. What if I'm changing the region to East US? And now you see it is the same SKU, absolutely same SKU, but the pricing got changed over here. Not really. I mean, it's not that why it is different. Because of the resource availability matters in some of the regions, that size may not be available, or it may be available at a higher cost. We will be discussing cost and billing in module number 4 today, but it's important to understand that when you're switching the region down there, of course, you're going to see the price changes up over here, even for the same configuration down there. We'll discuss that later on. So ideally, the best practice is I should be placing the resource nearest to the users who would ultimately be accessing that. Let me place it at the East US. I'm not looking for any redundancies as of now, no availability zones, no sets. The image, that comes up, that which image I would like to load on this particular options down there, pretty much when we talk about what is going to be my base image for the operating system. So let's say I'm looking for Windows Server 2019 data center. And having said that, we would discuss this one later on, what is the Azure Spot instance, just in case if you have an enterprise select cloud agreement with Microsoft and you're procuring it for a longer duration, a year or more, you can get a good discounted rates if you're booking your resource for a longer duration. That's fine. Let me come down over here, and this area right over here, size, pretty much explains what we need to consider as far as the resource creation is concerned. This is my SKU, which is ideally the compute. And so if I click on the select size, You are seeing the most recent ones. Let me show you all. Let me remove this filter. So pretty much let me see all the sizes, and you will see lots of sizes which are available on this given region. So the region right here is East US. There are some general purpose virtual machine SKUs. You can see the virtual CPUs 1, 2, 4, or 8. Accordingly, the amount of memory, how many data disks are supported, what IOPS you can expect by this particular configuration, what is an estimated cost if you're running it 24 hours basis, what would be the estimated cost for the month over there for this resource. An important thing, these are general purpose. If you further scroll it down, you will see some memory optimized options as well, where the CPUs are comparatively less, but it's more for the memory hungry applications where the cache's requirements high, and then data frequent reads and write, random read and write happening very frequently down there. So the memory optimized applications can be utilized with these SKUs down there. If you're looking for anything compute optimized, so when I say the HPCs, the high performance computes, you'll be seeing the higher number of virtual CPUs in composition of the memory drives down there. If anything related to storage, I'm talking about premium SSD drives and the all flash storage kind of concepts, not the enterprise SAS or spinning SATA drives. I'm talking about premium SSDs down there. You've got the storage optimized. You're looking for GPUs, you've got your Autodesk Arnold, you've got your Autodesk, pretty much the big graphics rendering engine, and you would like to run GPU intensive applications over the cloud. So you have these options available where pretty much it's pretty much available for every kind of workload requirement. You can start working on those VMs. Let me select my DS2 V3 at present. And next in the segment is I'm talking about what's going to be the username password. So let me go for, this is going to be the username, and I'm specifying the password over here. So there is always a built-in administrator which would be disabled, and this user would be created as an admin user, which would be having the built-in administrator role associated over there. That's fine. The administrator's group's member. Port or networking related things. Let's take an example. This is going to be a VM where I would be doing an RDP for 3389. Just in case if it is a Linux VM, I might want to enable SSH on port number 22. I would like to make it a web server, so HTTP/AT is enabled. Would you like to upload your SSL certificates and all? You can go for HTTPS. We'll discuss these ports and protocols in networking area later on. Let's go with, do you have a license? Yes or no, which can save you the cost, of course. You can see the disks and the drives you're associating that. So I'm associating the premium SSD with this virtual machine. If it's not a storage intensive workload, I can go with the standard HDD as well. I can go with standard SSD as well. And premium SSD is my all flash, which is giving me the best in terms of IOPS access down there. What networking options am I specifying in here? I'm going to have my virtual network with this particular IP address range. That's going to be a subnet. I'll be creating a public IP, which will be associated with this VM. So I can pretty much do an RDP and access it over the web using the web server protocols. Do you want to have an NSG and all? That goes up with accelerated and advanced networking things, which pretty much are discussed in the upper level of Azure programs like the Azure Administrator and for the Solution Architect 300 and 301. When it comes to management, how you'd like to go for the management options, and you can have multiple options associated with your VM right across in here. Important thing is, once you are done specifying all your parameters, I'm clicking on review and create. And one area I want you to look very carefully now. I don't see any hyperlink over here, the download template or anything. I'll explain you that later on when we would be discussing the ARM templates, the Azure Resource Manager templates, which are the JSON files, and how we can automate those resource deployments in a much faster pace using CLIs and all. So it is validating. And the moment I clicked on review and validate, and I can see the download a template for automation, we'll do this one later on. It is telling me the validation is passed. I can download that. We'll discuss that later on. But at this point of time, let me click on create. So I'm actually submitting our deployment, which will create a virtual machine, which will create a network security group, which will create a virtual network over there, which will create the data drives associated to that as well. So in the meanwhile, it is working. Let me take you to portal.azure.com one more time on a separate window, and let me show you something. So you will see that it is telling me submitting deployment, and the deployment will get started from here. You'll see that deployment is in progress. In the meanwhile, it's working. Let me take you to my Azure portal. Just wants to see my resource groups. The one which I created was AZ-900 D01. Let me click over here. And if you take a look on the resources, I'm currently seeing nothing because the deployment is currently in the running state right now. But let me take you to my deployments area. And here you see it's creating a virtual machine. I've got the deployment name, which is currently deploying from last 36 seconds. You want to see some details associated to that. You click over here and any operations failed or success, you'll be seeing it over there. Let me go back to my deployments. And when I click over here, that takes me to that deployment template. And we would be discussing about a custom template later on. So I've got a storage account for the diagnostics down there that has been created. It's currently running as of now. What were the inputs? So now you're seeing all the parameters, all these parameters, what we provided while we were submitting this virtual machine for creation. Am I expecting any output variable to that? And if you want to see that template, you can download it and reuse it. We'll be doing that later on. That's fine. This is my JSON file ARM template. We would be having a couple of practical demonstrations of this today in the program as well. Well, in the meanwhile, it is creating my Azure Cloud Shells being loaded over here. So let me show you something. I'm increasing the text size. And let's say I created a couple of resource groups from the portal. I created a virtual machine as well from the portal. So this time what I'd rather want to do, let me go for AZ, going for the Azure command shell down there. And what I would like to create, I'm actually creating a group, a resource group. Then the action. So the action is going to be list, show me all of them, or create a new one. So I'm actually creating a new resource group over here from the bash shell. Important thing to notice, what is going to be the location? So in this case, let me say the location is going to be West US, all right? Then important thing is what is going to be the name. So /n is for my parameters, the name parameters. And let's say I'm gonna specify AZ-900 RG02 CLI, whatever I would like to name it, that's up to me. Let me hit enter over here. So I'm submitting an Azure CLI command for creation of a resource group. And you can see that, well, that gets created over here. The message is succeeded. If I would like to see my Azure group down there, an important thing is, even if I'm not typing the complete command, just like PowerShell or your Visual Studio IDE, I'm pressing tab and that automatically completes the command down there. What I would like to see over here, well, let's say I would like to list the Azure groups, and now it's giving me all the Azure groups listed right across in there. Whether I want to see them on tabular format and all, I can always choose that. Let's verify we created one resource group from CLI. So let me go to the list of resource groups over here. And that's the one which we created right across. In the meanwhile, if I open my first one, where I submitted a virtual machine, now you see I've got 7 different resources created. You might be wondering, hey, we only submitted for a virtual machine. Why we are seeing 7 over here? Well, that's correct. I've got a virtual machine over here. You will see that that's in creation right over here. But the virtual machine would be having a public IP as well. It's going to have a network security group as well, the network interface associated to the VM, a disk associated to the VM, a diagnostic storage account, and a virtual network. So I will be seeing multiple things because it's not an isolated resource which I was creating down there. That's fine. If I click over here, let me go to the list of virtual machines down there. Now you will see that I created one VM, GTL host 1, and that is currently running over here. Let me open that. We can discuss whole lot of things. I mean, we can spend 2 complete days just for discussing all of these options about the virtual machines. But to give you a quick 10,000 feet level of overview kind of thing on this recently deployed resource, I can always connect to that. Important thing, when you want to connect, we enabled the port number 3389. That was for the RDP. So I can do an RDP to this Windows-based machine. If it's a Linux VM, I can click SSH. Last year, Microsoft introduced Azure Bastion service, which is really cool because I don't require a public IP to be associated to connect to a VM. I can connect it right from here, from the browser-based experience using the Bastion service. You just need to provision a Bastion service and add it to your subnet. That's a different thing altogether. But let's just say, currently, this is my public IP address, which is associated with the VM. The moment you say I want to connect it via RDP, that will download my RDP file with port number 3389 using this. Can I customize this port? Absolutely, yes. You can have your user-defined port just the way you were doing it on your on-prem virtual machine. So let me click on download this RDP file over here. In the meanwhile, the file's getting downloaded. Let me quickly try and connect to this virtual machine. So I'm in here. Now I'd like to connect to this particular VM. I'm seeing this connect dialog box. Let me click on connect. So this is going to ask me the credentials, and it is the same credentials which I created earlier. So let me utilize them. This was the username, and that's the password. Let me click OK. So this one's connecting in, small exception of the SSL, that's fine. Let's go in here. And this was my Windows Server 2019 that was with 2 virtual CPUs, and that was working up on 8 gig of memory. Let me maximize that. It's doing the profiling for the very first time. That's okay, it's working up. And currently I'm connected over here. Why it is 3389? Let me show you something. On this virtual machine, if I go to my networking area, over here, you see I've got some inbound, outbound ports over there. So I've got my inbound port rules on my NSG down there, the basic NSG, that the RDP is having port number 3389 from any source to any destination. That's currently allowed right across in there. Now, one thing to specify, well, that's not so much dedicated to networking because that's not a detailed course, but anything with the priority numbers, the numbers keep on increasing. So the lowest the number is in the priority area, that would be comes first in terms of the filtering of your protocols. So if I got a 300, which is allow, and I've got a 320, which is also allow. So this is the way how they are going to be sequenced when we talk about the network evaluations of the inbound port protocols. That's fine. Let me take you to the host over here that is currently working. Well, that was my Windows Server 2019, the one which we deployed. Important thing I want to show you, if I click on local server, you're seeing the computer name as GTL host 01. Well, this was the value when what we provided while we were provisioning this virtual machine. And if I open the task manager right over here, I am currently seeing 2 virtual processors. So let me change it to the logical processors, 2 processors down there, and they are the VM, yes, and 8 gig of memory right across in there. So that's pretty much what we specified while we were working on creating this virtual machine. Port number 80 is absolutely enabled. So if I paste that public IP address and I'm seeing 8080 down there, I will see nothing. It is correct that port number 80 is allowed to send traffic, but I don't have anything hosted on the IIS. So the web server role is not configured. Hence, I'm not seeing anything over here. If you want your web server to be appearing in there, well, that's the same Windows server. You go in there, you add roles, you configure, and it'll be good to go thereafter. Well, that is one thing which talks about my resource provisioning when it comes to my Azure portal. How do we create and how do we start working right across in there? Now, at the same time, there is a question which comes up very often that, hey, should we do it from the portal or should we do it from CLI? And by CLI, I mean it could either be Bash, it could either be PowerShell, depending on whatever your personal preference is, or should we do it from API access, yeah, Visual Studio or anything? Well, it depends, pretty much can be anything. Sometimes the GUI, the portal, may not provide you the functionality which you can always do from CLI. So the CLI, you can pretty much do every single thing right over there, whereas the GUI might not provide you full functionality, not because it's not present. It might be because it's not available in current form of plan which you're doing. So let's take an example for that. Let's say if I go to my Azure Active Directory over here. Now, when I see my Azure Active Directory, I've got my Azure AD. And since it was a pretty much a promotional subscription and I created my tenant from scratch, so we are on the Azure AD free layer. We can upgrade ourselves to the premium layer, the P1 or P2. That's a different thing over there. But what is important, I'm trying to explain you between CLI and Azure Portal and all. Let's say I've got my roles over here. I've got roles and administrators where I will be seeing plenty of roles available. And there is an option says, can we create a custom role? The answer is absolutely yes. But in this case, the option is grayed out for me. So it's not because I'm not a global tenant admin or account owner or something. I'm the global administrator. I have access to everything. Still, it's grayed out because if you want to create custom roles from the portal, you'll have to upgrade yourself to Azure Premium P1 or P2, which comes up with the cost. And that's one of the examples that it is still a possibility. All I need to do is create a ARM template for the custom role and have that deployment provisioned from my CLI. So I can do it from there, and we'll be doing it today on module number 4. I'll show you that example. So it is something, the functionality is already present over here, but because of I'm on a different layer of plan, it's grayed out. I can do it from the CLI always, one. Second, there are some commands or functionalities because the CLI can give you thousands of commands related to a single resource, whereas the portal will give you limited actions to be deployed. So that is correct. The CLI provides you more functionality than the portal, but I would say 98.5% cases, you can do everything from everywhere. There would be very few instances when you specifically have to do them from the Azure CLI, the Bash shell, or the PowerShell. Okay, that's a more frequent question which comes up over there. That's okay. Let's come up in here when we talk about, there was a very small walkthrough which was talking about creating a virtual machine. Well, I did, and I created a virtual machine. So first thing is done. The second thing was connecting to that virtual machine. I already did it via RDP. Well, they want us to install a web server role and test it. To be very honest, you start considering this as exactly as any other VM. It could be a VM in my local data center. It could be a VM in my personal laptop, a virtualized VM for testing purposes. It could be a VM on Azure AWS anywhere. So the VM functionality never changes. It's just like where it is deployed. Is it on-prem? Is it on a public cloud? Is it on a hybrid cloud? So let's go. I'm clicking on add a role, for example. Moving next over here, let me go next again. This is the host which is in question. I would like to configure my web server role, for example. Let me just say add the related features. Let me go next over there, and I'm simply going to deploy that option. If required, I can always restart that if required, but that's okay. That's just a very small role. And it will take maybe 2 to 3 minutes over here to configure that role. How slow and fast this thing can be, that completely depends on two major things. Actually three, but two are most critical. One, what is the compute we are providing over here? And second, what's my storage? because today, in today's world, computes and networks are no longer a bottleneck. The actual bottleneck in your virtual machines seems to be the storage. If it's on a spinning drives versus if it's a regular SSD versus if it's a premium SSD with all flash, can makes you a difference. A premium SSD VM is at least 25 times faster than a spinning standard HDD VM. And that's proven, and you can always test it the way you want. So it all comes up, the storage and the compute makes you a resource which would be high performance, pretty much GPU enabled, and all of those things comes up in there. So let's find it's installing up in here. And ideally what it is doing to show you that, if I go in initpub, I'm going to see my www root down there, and I have a very small PNG file. Well, let me just do one real quick thing over there. This is my paint, and let me just do it. Just for testing, I just changed this particular picture by #1 so that it's a customized, you can deploy any of your test site on this IIS, that's okay. Let's come back over here on my portal where I was having that public IP address, and it was presently resolving to nothing because port number 80 wasn't pretty much having any IIS or any web server configured. Let me refresh it now. This is the same public IP address of the virtual machine which was in question. So it's all up to us whether you want to put a port number 80 or anything. So that's my public IP. And you will see that this is my public IP, which is basic. Also, we need to understand the basic will give you a dynamic public IP. The standard plan will give you a static public IP address. So as soon as I refresh it up, let's see guys, I'm on port number 80, and this is what I customized on that particular picture. So that was another step on this demonstration, that how can you install a web server role and test whether it's currently accessible over Azure. Well, that's fine. That's one quick thing what we just did in there. At the same point of time, we have virtual networks, multiple things which we can always create. So another demonstration talks about a virtual network over here. So let's take an example of this as well. So when I was actually deploying that particular virtual machine, let me take you back to my portal right across in here. When I was deploying that virtual machine, it actually created a couple of resources associated with it. So let me go to my resource group where I was working up, and I've seen 7 different resources. One of them is a virtual network, which was created as part of this virtual machine deployment. If you open that up, you'll see the details listed in there. Like this is a VM. What is the IP address range does it provide? What subnet would it be the part of? Well, that's fine. Let's say I would like to create a standalone virtual network. This time only single resource over here. So let me go over there. I'm talking about my virtual networks. Let me come to my virtual network area. I'm already seeing one. Let me add another one over here. Once again, I can do it from the portal. I can do it from Azure CLI. I can do it from Azure PowerShell. I can do it from REST-based services the way I want. Let me select my resource group. So this will be the part of the same D01 resource group which I created. Let me call it GTL VNet 01. This is the name I would like to use, and what would be the associated region. Next in the segment, you specify the IP address configuration. So you see it's all automatically giving me 10.1.0.0.16/16 address, a class B IP address down there. I can make it /24 or any custom classless IP address range down there. At the same point of time, it's giving me the subnet as well. We can have multiple subnets created the way you want. And what kind of services you'd like to enable. Do you want to enable the Bastion host over there? Now, this is important. The Bastion service will allow you to connect your virtual machines directly from the portal without having the need of a public IP or port SSH clients down there. So for that, the Bastion service must be there. And currently we don't have one. That's fine. Do you want to have the dynamic DOS protection associated with that? You want to go with the basic plan or the standard plan and all those things over there? The firewall, you would like to create a new Azure firewall. We'll be discussing that. Let's go with the default one. I'm not associating any tag over here. It's highly recommended and very often a best practice to have these key value pairs associated. We'll be discussing them today post lunch in Azure policies, tags, and all. That's fine. Let me create this virtual network from here. So I'm submitting this for the deployment. It's working up. It's getting that created. Let it get done. And you can see that it is telling us your deployment is completed. Right now, it's important to understand if you go to your resource group, right from here, let me go to this 900D01. And if I click on deployments, you will see how many deployments we have done and what was their status. How much time does it took? Pretty much good for monitoring and seeing who did what at what time, kind of logging or log captures, log analytics. We'll do that later on in this course as well. So my virtual network has been created successfully. If I go in here, now you see I've got two different virtual networks, one which I already created previously, and the second one, which I did isolated as a single resource deployment. Can I do it from Azure CLI or PowerShell or Bash? Well, absolutely yes, I can always do that. Let's take an example. What I would like to do this time, for example, I'm creating AZ, and this time the type of resource I would like to create is a network. Important thing is, what is going to be the action? Am I seeing them? I can use list, I can use delete, I can have create. So the action here is going to be create this time. So when I talk about I'm creating a network down there, and that's going to be a virtual network. And my action's going to be create associated with this. Important thing is what is going to be the name. In my previous example, I was saying /n, it's a parameter acronym for name. At the same time, I can also specify _name. That's how the bash scripts are written. You can pretty much use the same thing. Let me go, this time it's going to be GTL VNet 02, for example, or let's call it 05 from CLI, the one which I'm creating. On which resource group it would be the part of. So I'm specifying the resource group name. That is going to be AZ-900 D01. Okay, that's the resource group where I'm creating. I'm going to create a subnet associated with that. I'm sorry. So that's going to be my subnet name, the parameter of the subnet. And let's call it GTL subnet 01. And I hit enter. I can define the address range and all that. And if you're not specifying that, it will pick up by default the next available address range from your Azure ARM subscriptions down there. That's fine. It is submitting that. You will see the status as coming up as succeeded. If I come back to my virtual networks, let me refresh. And sometimes you will notice you are refreshing and it's not appearing. Well, what I used to do is always do a control plus F5, refresh it from the server. And even if I go on the resource group, just to show you, let me go 900D01. And this was the virtual network which was in question, VNet 05, which I created from the CLI. That was having an address range associated with that. That was also having a subnet associated with that, the one which I created. So no need to say that whatever resources we can create from the portal, we can also create the same resources from Azure CLI, whether it's Bash or PowerShell or pretty much doing it from the Cloud Shell, or you're doing it from your local PowerShell module installed. That's fine. Let's come back over here. That was a very small example where I had this virtual network created associated with the same thing. Now we are talking about some of our storage services, infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, how the storages are playing an important role down there. So when we talk about Azure storage as the next concept, I've got my disks. So as far as my infrastructure as a service component is concerned, I've got lots of virtual machines. and the VMs will be having the data drives or the OS drives associated with them. So physically, they are the disks which are available on the Azure. I can have my files which I can deploy on SMB protocol and have them as file shares and start utilizing them. When I talk about platform as a service compute, I've got my Azure storage accounts, which can give me containers. Now, once again, a confusing term, let me make it more realistic, which can give us blobs, the binary large objects associated with them, which can give us Azure tables for NoSQL data, which can give us queues for MSMQ processings or the file shares down there. So let's take a look, how does these things actually work when we talk about Azure platforms down there. So I'm taking you back to my Azure portal. Right over here, this time I'm actually creating a different type of resource that is going to be my storage account. Well, let me create that. You will see I've already got some storage accounts. One, which was created based on the shell when I was deploying the Cloud Shell for the very first time, and a diagnostic account associated with a virtual machine. Let me create a storage account over here. And this is going to be important to understand. Once again, the storage accounts are discussed in DP200, which is another data platform program for 3 days. And they're discussed in lot more in detail than this brief overview of AZ-900. But just to give you a heads up, this is going to be the resource group where I would be deploying this storage account. What is going to be the name of the storage account? Let's call it GTL store 01. Now it is important to understand, and let's say if I'm specifying any name over here, previously, I was creating a resource group, I was creating a virtual machine, I was creating a virtual network or anything. So those names have to be unique inside your resource group. And resource group names have to be unique inside your subscription. But when I talk about a storage account or a Azure web app or an API app or a logic app or a Azure Data Factory, those names have to be unique globally. Why I'm saying that? Let me show you something. So for that, I'm quickly gonna open my notepad real quick. So let's understand, when I talk about my Azure storage account over here, I'm going to have a name associated to that. Let's call it, I'm saying GTL store 87, for example. So how I'm going to access that? Is it going to be HTTP or is it going to be HTTPS? That's up to me. I'm going to have the name of my storage account, dot, what kind of service I'm accessing that, dot, core.windows.net. So this core.windows.net is always going to be a suffix on your Azure hosted storage accounts. Now that can be replaced by a custom domain, but by default, that's how it looks. Now I understand the name. What we don't understand is what that service actually stands for. So there would be 4 major services which comes up as part of your Azure storage account. One of them is going to be my containers. Well, that's been recently renamed 2.5 years down the line, but ideally their URL remains the same. That was blob, and now also it's blob, but they're being named as containers, the binary large objects. Another service which we can talk about is my Azure table. And at the same point of time here, I'm going to have my container and the name of the container whatsoever, the name of the blob.jpg or PDF or anything, whatever I have. Here, I'm going to have the name of my table down there and followed by whatever table I'm specifying in there. At the same time, if I talk about a third service, that's going to be my Azure queues. And I'm going to have the name of the Azure queue for kind of MSMQ processing or anything. At the same point of time, I'm going to have my Azure files. That's my SMB protocol, my Azure files down the line. So 4 major services. Let's understand them. I'm creating a storage account over here. The name of that is GTL store 87, for example. Just wants to make sure, okay, it's already taken. Let me make it 84. Should be good. Okay, and it has to be unique globally, first of all. Where I'm going to deploy that, Well, let's say this is the one which I'm doing for my Canadian customers and prospects and leads. So I'm going to store it on my Canada Central. Let me just have it over here. Performance. And this one is really important, guys. The performance, account type, and replication. These three options can take at least 3 to 4 hours understanding each one, everything in much larger details down there. But what is more important, that when I'm saying a standard performance, whether it's going to be general purpose V1 or V2, a legacy storage account from Microsoft Azure, or the V2, which is currently recommended by Microsoft, we should always be using when possible. At the same point of time, if I'm saying premium, I'm having multiple options, file, blob, and all that. Important thing is when it is standard and when it is version 1, my replication mechanism is quite only 3 replication mechanisms are there. A locally redundant storage, which is making 3 copies, but within the same data center. When I talk about globally a geo-redundant storage, which is multiple regions, a read access geo-redundant storage, the read access on the secondary source on the replication mechanism. But that's not important. I'm not explaining you all these. What I'm trying to explain, in my version 1, there were 3 replication mechanisms. If I'm selecting it to version 2, I've got these 4 different replication mechanisms down there. At the same time, if I'm selecting a blob storage over here, I've got 3 different options down there. So let's say if it is my version 2 and I'm saying premium, only the local redundant storage is currently available. So these options will pretty much take place, that what replication mechanisms and the account kinds would be available. Important thing to notice, the standard is my spinning drives. The premium is my premium SSDs, all flash storage. If I go standard, version 2, the access tier, cool should be used for data archival purposes or the data which is not very frequently accessed. Whereas my hot tier is ideally for more frequently accessed data. I can create the way I want. Let me go ahead and review and create. And I'm going to hit create button right over there. So it's technically validating this. And I can do the same thing by specifying these options from CLI as well. No different thing from there. So let's see, my deployment is underway over here. Just to show you, if I go to my resource groups, the D01 is where I deployed it. Let me click on the deployments tab over here. And you can see that currently this is deploying, 17 seconds passed, and technically creating a storage account right across from here. Let's find it is working up, like it created once. And I'll show you then by going to that resource. Okay, this is succeeded. Let me click on go to the resource. I'm on my storage account, and 4 major services which I was talking about. I've got a container, I've got the file shares, I've got the tables, I've got the queues. Important thing as far as this account is considered, if you click on the access keys, you have these access keys associated with you. This is the storage name, the primary key and secondary key. More often there is a question in the exam, how many access keys you get with a storage account? A 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, it will always be 2. No less than 2, no more than 2. Can we create 3? No. Can we do it from CLI? Well, not at all. You've got these 2 keys, a primary key and a secondary key. Can we regenerate them? Absolutely, yes. So when I click on overview, these are the accounts which I have with me. Let's just take an example. I'm in the containers. Ideally, they are the blobs, the binary large object. I'm creating a container over here. Let's call it my data, for example. And currently it is private. And I'm saying no anonymous access at present. Let me create this container. I've got a sample container over here called my data. Let me open that. Underneath this, I'm uploading a blob, a binary large object. Let me upload that. And for demonstration purposes, can I do any sample picture? Well, let's go with this one. Let's go with this one, a sample image down there. I'm uploading this one. Okay, so the upload is successful. And if I open this, this is my blob. This is my binary large object. Let me copy this particular URL, and just for demonstration, I'm showing you, I'm pasting it over here, and that's telling me the specified resource doesn't exist. Well, the important thing is, because I set it that up for private access. So to go over there with this practical exposure, let me quickly paste it. I'm pasting that URL to everybody on the class. Let me do everyone in the meeting. And I want you to click on that URL and confirm me that you're also seeing the same message. The specified resource doesn't exist. So let's click on that, guys, and have it on the chat that you're seeing the same message. You're not able to find that resource. You're not seeing that image. Great. Yep, thank you. Thank you very much for the quick confirmation, guys. And the reason, well, it's not like the resource is not existing over here. We know the resource actually is there. The important thing is when we were creating that container, we had that access level. So if I'm changing that access level from private to public, let me have it for the container access and click OK down there. I simply changed my access level for the blob. And this time, if I'm refreshing, I'm seeing that particular image in front of me. So can you guys quickly refresh that URL and see that you're seeing the same, you're seeing the image? I'm just showing you the same URL again, and you should be seeing that particular image. Okay. Well, that's quite easy, and that's quite easy to understand. In case of my Azure resources, what is my access level? And that talks about some of the security points a cloud provider provides you. Now, we can have enhanced security over there. That is something we discuss in DP200, a separate program. But since we are in here, let me explain you the same thing. I'm changing back the access level to private, no anonymous access. I'm clicking OK. And we know very well, the moment I'm making that as private over here, when I refresh, it will tell me the specified resource doesn't exist because we know the anonymous access has been disabled. Now, somehow what I want to do, I would like to apply some enhanced security on this resource with controlled access. So let me show you something. I'm on my portal, and important thing to notice about, we can do the same thing from portal, from CLI, from Visual Studio via code, being an Azure developer or anything. So let's take a look. On this particular container, I've got a blog listed over here, a binary large object. Over here, I have something called as generate SaaS, which is my shared access signatures. So let's see how good that functionality is. I'm clicking on generating that shared access signature. First thing first, what kind of access I want to provide on this resource? Let's say read and write, or delete as well. Or in this case, I'm just going with the read-only access, okay? It will be applicable from today. It will be applicable up till 24th, the Friday. On this particular time, the time zone we can always specify. What is more important over here, if I'm specifying an IP address or a range, this resource will be available only from those specific IP addresses or the range, whatever you provide in here. If it is blank, that'll be accessible from everyone who have this shared access signature URL. It'll be accessible over HTTPS for enhanced security. Am I using key 1 or key 2 for generating that and signing that shared access signatures? And well, let me click on generate SaaS token. And that is another important thing, guys. This time I've got my the SaaS URL down there. Let me quickly copy that up real quick. And I'm pasting it over here. And as a result, I'm seeing that picture. But if someone's pasting the same URL previously, we are seeing that error over here. Well, let me do the same thing to you and start explaining that. I'm putting up that shared access signature URL. This time, if you guys will click on that, you will be able to see that image, although that is private, no anonymous access. So what is important, let me explain you that over here. Now, let me put up my shared access signature over here and try to explain you all these things in detail. Important thing, GTL store 84, this is the name of my storage account. We are talking about a container, so a binary large object. The suffix is always going to be core.windows.net. The my data is the name of the container where my blob is. The name of the blob is D365 customized.png. That's an image. Now it is important. My shared access signature permission is read. The R stands for read. That is my start date with the encoded time zone. That's my end date over there. My the secured protocol accessibility is HTTPS, and I've got my SV, pretty much my the time zones down there. And I've got my SR, pretty much the read permissions over the blob, and that's my signature generated using the primary key. So now we understand that this SAS token, so importantly, if anybody is having that older URL, my image will still not be accessible. It will only be accessible to all those people who does have this secured URL with them, a SAS generated token. Important thing, it will only be on those date ranges. It will only be with the specified permissions. So if you want to have some controlled access from specific IPs over a specific protocol within the dates between, you can always do a SAS token generation. We can always have it right across in there. That's one thing when we talk about the shared access token functionality. You can do it on your any of your blobs. Go over there, generate the SAS, have your permissions defined and all those options listed. I can do it on my entire storage account as well. For example, if I go to my GTL store 84 and you go down across in there, I've got the properties listed at any given point of time. You would like to see all those details coming up in here. You might want to generate your shared access signatures associated with them. So you go to containers or anywhere down there, open that container, generate your shared access signatures for the entire container and all. So that's one thing when we talk about an enhanced add-on policies listed, not really a policy actually, but an enhanced SAS tokens associated with that. That's one thing which we talk about, having our storage account, having some of the shared access tokens associated and created on top of them. Now, another thing to notice, someone was saying, hey, do we have all the functionalities available in the portal or CLI is better? So for example, I generated a SAS token. But now, if you go to that container again and you open that blob on those SAS policies, if you click on generate SAS, I'm not seeing any previous tokens over here, although that is in effect. If you refresh it, that's still available and that will be available till the expiry date. But the important thing is you cannot retrieve that how many SAS tokens were generated for that. If you want to have that kind of functionality, then you have to head back to your CLI and retrieve those SAS tokens from that resource right across. So some of the things which are already available and have these things over there. Okay, a quick question over here, and the answer to that, yes, guys, the entire session is getting recorded, and you guys would be receiving a recording URL associated within your email for that. That's fine. Okay, so let's have my Azure portal in here, and it was talking about some of the Azure services which we can always create. So there was a demonstration, how can you create a binary large object storage? We already just did. We created the blob storages and created some of those resources listed on top of that. Now I've got some database services associated and listed over here. I've got my Azure Cosmos DB. I've got my Azure SQL database. I've got my Azure data migration, Postgre, multiple database options available down there. Now, what is important to understand that we can spend days discussing these. Being AZ-900, we are just discussing a very brief, a 10,000 level feet of overview kind of things for those particular resources down here. So let's understand, for example, I would like to work on some relational databases. So for that, I'm moving to my SQL Server. And before I do that, guys, I want to show you something. Let's understand the same thing. I would like to have my relational databases, but this time I would like to do them on premises. In that case, I'll be having some virtual machines listed. I'll be installing the operating system. I'll be having my SQL Server installed on top of them, making the clustering available or database mirroring applications and all that. And that's a lot of work what we used to do. The Azure Cloud Software as a Service component can help you creating and managing that and up and running in minutes. Well, how do we do that? Let's take an example. I'm creating an Azure SQL Server. Well, there are multiple things over there. One, the Azure SQL Server is different than Azure SQL Database. Azure SQL Database, pretty much the collection of databases will be stored in your Azure SQL Server. The Azure SQL Database Server will not cost you anything. Again, the Azure SQL Database Server will not cost you anything over Azure Cloud. So let's see that. Let me select my resource group over here. We're going to specify the name of the server over here. When I talk about the name of the server, let's call it GTL-DB-SVR-09. And this is what I would like to name it. It has to be globally unique because the prefix is going to be .database.windows.net. Okay, this is my server name. I would like to deploy it, which is nearest to me, the East US region. Let's have the SQL Server login details, just like you're installing a SQL Server on-prem and you're providing SA, a mixed mode authentication for system administrator. So let me go GTL admin with the password listed over here, whatever I specify. All right, we can have additional settings. Let me review and create. Important thing to note is I do not have any charges. It's completely free. So having an Azure SQL Server is absolutely free. But when you will be deploying your SQL databases on top of them, they would be chargeable. So we'll discuss that. So let me quickly create that. And let me just have it. I initialized this particular deployment. All right, it's validating. I am submitting this for deployment. And in the meanwhile, let me go to my Azure resource group down there. That was D01, where I'm deploying my resources for today. And we are seeing one deployment should be in process over here, which is my SQL Server that is currently deploying. Let it get completed. The moment my SQL Server deployment gets completed, we will start working on creating some databases on top of it. Some of them could be my dedicated SQL databases. Some of them would be my shared databases associated with them. In the meanwhile, it's working. Let me take you to my PowerPoint presentation. So there is a walkthrough next, which we are already doing, creating a SQL server. But this one talks about creating a SQL database, query that database and then create it on Azure portal. How does it work? Let's take an example. So I'm waiting till my SQL Server database gets creation. So this is my SQL Server we are creating right now. Important thing, if you talk about SQL database, they are completely different from your SQL Server. So let me click on SQL database. And I would like to create a SQL database, all right? So what is important here, you need to specify in which resource group I'm creating that, that's fine. The next segment here is the name of the database. Well, that could be anything. This is not globally unique because this would be hosted inside your SQL Server. So let me call it my GTL DB01. And ideally, guys, this should be a meaningful name. I'm using these just for demonstration purposes, but being a best practices should be a meaningful name, which will contain the usage, whether it's dev, test, production, or North America or Southeast Asia, whatever you might want to bring that up. Important, the server, that is something which we already created. And to show you, you will see that the deployment is completed. I now have my SQL Server deployed over here. So let me go back to my database creation. This is the server where I will be deploying it. Once again, the server doesn't incur any cost. It's just like software as a service component. The actual cost will be from the database itself. And this one will decide. So want to use SQL Elastic Pool? I will be explaining you this in my next demonstration. As of now, the compute plus storage will decide what is going to be the cost consumption for this SQL database. So let's say I'm talking about generation 5, 2 virtual cores, 32 gig of storage. You want to configure it to utilize more or less. That will define what an estimated cost is going to be. Well, let me go with the default one, 2 cores, 32 gig of storage. Let me review and create. An estimated cost for this database is going to be $380 a month if running 24/7 over Azure. Okay, let me quickly create that. So I'm actually provisioning a database, and on top of it, it is a blank database. So on my additional settings, I didn't specify any sample or anything. It's just a blank database. Let's say I would like to go that for again on my SQL database. Let me create one more. And this time it's going to be my GTL DB02. And on my additional settings, this is going to be a sample database with AdventureWorks data coming up right across in there. Let me review and create. Once again, $380. I'm clicking on create. And that's fine. I submitted 2 different deployments. One, an empty database. The second one, a database with some sample tables coming up from AdventureWorks sample database down there. We will be discussing the Elastic Pool as well, which can act as a shared logical container for my databases for the cost efficiencies of down there. So let's take an example. If I talk about my Elastic Pools, I'm talking about my SQL Elastic Pool. This time I'm creating a logical container. So let me create a SQL Elastic Pool on the same server itself. So this is going to be the one. This is going to be the server down here. Let's call it GTL Elastic Pool 01. I'll be creating this on this particular server. 2 virtual cores, 32 gig of, currently 0 databases in it. That's fine. Let me review and create. And I'm creating that. So I submitted 3 different deployments. One, an empty database with same compute, a sample database with same compute, and an Elastic Pool with the same compute. What is the benefit of an Elastic Pool is next time onwards, I can create multiple databases inside that Elastic Pool. So they would be sharing the same compute. So performance might not be good as isolated, but the cost will absolutely bring down. Some questions over here. $300 will be each or for all? So to answer that, guys, it is per resource basis. So I deployed 3 different resources on 3 different configurations, 2 virtual cores for each resource and the 32 gig of storage for each resource. So it's $380 times 3. That's what I'm estimating for the cost in here. And that's why SQL Elastic Pools are really important. So if you're not very performance hungry applications, you're not like high performance compute or anything, most of the people, small to mid-scale organizations, would love to place their databases inside an Elastic Pool. So the compute will be shared and the cost will be consolidated. And we can always upscale or downscale the Elastic Pool whenever required. But if you want to have some databases with dedicated compute and storage, that is also a possibility. You can always do that. So that was one thing, guys, some of the resources which we have deployed. Now, of course, I'll be showing you how do we use them, how do we query them, what are my server firewall rules, and plenty of multiple demonstrations. So now let's proceed for the lunch break, guys. This is 12 o'clock Eastern. We should be resuming the class at 1 o'clock Eastern. And we'll start right from the same screen. We would be discussing utilizing those SQLs, querying those databases, putting databases into the Elastic Pool, and setting some server firewall rules before proceeding to the next service. So thank you very much for being with me, guys. I should see you post-lunch. Enjoy your food, and the session resumes at 1 o'clock Eastern. Thank you very much.